When the excitement of Christmas turns into the blahs of winter, sometimes we all need a little help to get out of the funk.
I found my way out of the dark. Out of the dark. Out of the dark. Out of the dark.
The goal of these few weeks was to meet people in this sanctuary where you are, and to provide a space for you to realize that you've never been alone, never been forgotten, and to address this funk that you might be living in for the short term, or a funk that you might be in now for months or years. And as we've shared, as we receive prayer requests, as we have conversations with people, we've realized that we've struck a nerve, that it's not just 2, 3, 10 people we're addressing, that there's quite a few of us that for one reason or another, we're just in the middle of junk right now. Junk that leads to a funk that somehow just gets darker and darker. Now, we get there many different ways. Sometimes we get there because we've walked in there ourselves because of our addiction or a hurt we've caused. Sometimes it's someone else has drug us in there because of the hurt they've caused us long ago or just recently. But our goal is to offer hope, that it's not a place God ever intended you to exist. Psalm 23, David himself talked about, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, it's never a place where you're supposed to stay. It's a place where you're supposed to maybe pass through and grow, but God intends a life that's full of living and full of light. So regardless of what got you there, you add on top of it these shorter days and these longer nights, and then you add a day like yesterday. That was just yuck. I mean, you just want to curl up in bed and just say, don't talk to me, don't touch me. And I couldn't. That's where I wanted to stay all day. You add to the weather, and it kind of tends to beat you down even more. So we've talked over the last 3 weeks with Pastor Chuck and then Pastor Dave Holdren, who was our senior pastor for, I think it was 8 years. He came back last week. We talked about the funk, but what brings us there, how to survive it, and maybe why we should come out. But today we want to deal with another issue, something that when we are in that moment, something that has the power to keep us there for a prolonged period of time, which is incredibly dangerous. See, I've seen people who haven't just been through a few days or weeks of funk, but have been there for months or even years. I've sat across the desk from them. I've been with them on phone calls, people from church, friends, even family members who've been in their darkness for so long, either because of something they did or something done to them so long that by the end of our conversation, it wasn't me begging them to come out of their funk. It was them begging me to see that their reality was actually the true one. It was them saying, Bo, you just wait. Your world's about to cave in. This hope you talk about, that's a pipe dream. Where I'm living, you just wait, Bo, and you come talk to me in a few months when your world shatters. I've been in the funk for prolonged seasons. I was in the funk because of addictions. I was in the funk because of trying to get up day after day to go to a job at a different church that I just didn't want to be at because the people there were making it very hard for a season. I remember one day, shortly after my son's accident where he had to have his leg amputated, I remember having to go to the hospital to grab some medication. I was driving, it's a 12-minute drive from my little town of Berlin to the hospital in Millersburg, and I remember plain as day coming down the hill into Millersburg before I got to the first stoplight. This was within weeks of the accident and the amputation taking place. I remember just breaking down and crying as I'm driving. I don't mean little tears. I was wailing in the car. I don't know how I even saw through the tears to see the stoplight, because I had to get through 2 stoplights to get to my turn, even get to the hospital. Because in that moment, I was consumed. I was broken. The hurt, the funk was so suffocating. Because I was in a place of completely shattered dreams that I had for my then one and only and oldest son. My dreams, mind you, not God's dreams. Because while God was in a season of recalibrating those dreams in my mind, I couldn't see 13 years down the road. Couldn't see a boy in marching band. Couldn't see a boy with one leg in show choir dancing and not falling. Couldn't see a boy on a high school swim team or a high school track team, or standing right up here behind me during praise team this Sunday morning, or driving to church to get here on a Sunday morning. If you'd have told me that would happen, to me that was so far in the distance. It's something I never could have seen. Because in the moment I had lost so much. I was there. I've been in funks, but I'm not there anymore. See, though we go through seasons, though we go through funks, the funk was never meant to be a permanent residence for any of us. Just a place we pass through and maybe grow from, but we're never meant to live perpetually in there. It was never God's intent. You're going to see today it wasn't his intent, because he's trying to pull people out of the funk. But if we aren't careful, you're going to see today through the story that the enemy has an incredibly powerful tool to keep us there. To keep us there for a long period of time. To mess with us. And force us to walk through a long season of death, a long winter, a long darkness. Now, I could tell you what that tool is, but then the sermon would be over and you'd be walking out the door. And I want to keep you a little longer than that. All right? No, I'm not going to tell you, because I'm going to let Elijah tell you the story of Elijah, which 2 weeks ago Pastor Chuck spoke out of as well. Because Elijah went through a funk himself. So for those of you who might have missed it 2 weeks ago, I'm going to revisit it. For those of you who were here, we're going to refresh it, because to get to where we're going, to see that tool that the enemy uses, you got to understand his story once again. So Elijah kind of breaks into this world as a prophet. Elijah, as a prophet, is not necessarily understood to be just a fortune teller, someone who predicts the future. A prophet in that season, in that time, was one who was known to be the mouthpiece of God. If God wanted to speak, he found a faithful man, a faithful woman to share something with, to go and find a king or his people, or even enemy kings and enemy peoples, to share his message, which can be incredibly dangerous, because when you're a sinful people, as Israel did quite a bit, usually the messages aren't very hopeful. They point out what you're doing wrong. So the prophet's job could be a very dangerous job, because you're telling people something they don't want to hear. Now, today, I hope I get to tell you something you do want to hear. But we got to work through Elijah first. So he breaks into the scene in 1 Kings 16, going to King Ahab, who's the king of Israel. One of the Israelites. He wasn't a good king. And these are the first words out of the prophet Elijah's mouth. His first prophecy before the king. Such great news. As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, this is out of 1 Kings 16, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word. See ya. That's not the Bible. That's all he gives him. Hey, king, nice to meet you. I'm God's prophet. It's not going to rain for several years until I say so. See who has the power now, buddy. I'm out of here. He's not making friends right away, but that's how he breaks onto the scene. Later on in that chapter, we see that God fills him with such power, he actually raises a young man from the dead. And then we have that epic showdown, this throwdown between Elijah, the one prophet of the God of Israel, and the 500 priests of Baal. Pastor Chuck went through that story. Let me touch it again for you real quick. Elijah and these prophets want to prove who is the one true God. They both build altars. They both cut up an oxen and put it on top of the altar. And the God who answers the prayers of his people by fire from heaven to consume the sacrifice, that proves who the one true God is. So you got Elijah, one man praying over here, versus the 500 prophets of Baal singing and dancing and shouting and cutting themselves to bleed to show how committed they are to their prophet Baal. That's part of the amazing part of the story, 500 versus 1. Here's an even bigger part though. This is before we had the Roman pantheon of gods. That was right around Jesus' time, where he had the Mars and Venus and Jupiter, Saturn, those gods. And this is even before the Greek pantheon of gods like Zeus and Hades and Athena. This is before that even, where we have an ancient Near Eastern pantheon of gods, and one of the primary, if not the primary god, was the god Baal. Baal was the god of fertility. And not just human fertility, having kids, which was very important in their society to have lots of kids. He was also the god of fertility of the land, which was really important in an agrarian culture, an agrarian society where all they did was farm. Few little things of industry, but primarily they're raising crops and raising cattle and raising sheep. And do you recall what isn't happening right now in Israel when Elijah is facing off with these prophets? It's not raining. Hasn't rained in over 2 years. And that's Baal's job. So you wanted to make sure you were making Baal happy above all, because not only are these people now wondering where their God is, they're starving. They're longing for God to show themselves, just as the people of Israel are longing for this God to show himself, because they're under the oppressive regime of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. So it isn't just a neat little TV show where they're trying to show who's the best. These people are hungry physically and hungry spiritually for one of the gods to show themselves. So the God of Israel, the God of Elijah, shows himself by raining down fire from heaven. And when that's done, he looks at the people of Israel and says, hey, look, this is the one true God. So now let's go kill off all the priests of Baal. So the thousands of people on the mountain go over and take care of all these prophets. And then, the coolest part of the story, before they even get down the mountain, rain clouds start to form on the horizon. And before they get to the bottom, rain comes after over 2 years of drought. In one day, God rains fire from heaven, and God ends the drought by raining water as well, proving his existence, proving his power, and proving Elijah's passion as well. Needless to say, King Ahab, Queen Jezebel aren't too happy that all these priests are killed off or that their God failed. So her next decree was to make sure that Elijah is next killed. Great day. So Elijah hears about this, so he takes off, hightails it into the countryside, into the wilderness to hide, just to preserve his life. And it is into the wilderness that he goes, that he enters the wilderness of his funk. While he's in the wilderness, we now catch a glimpse of that tool that potentially can keep Elijah in this perpetual funk for a long period of time. 1 Kings 19, 13, and 14. You can read it with me up there or follow along in your Bibles if you want. 1 Kings 19, 13 through 14. Then a voice, this is God, then a voice says to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah? Why are you out here in the wilderness by yourself?" Elijah replies, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. But the Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too." Isolation strengthens the funk. Isolation prolongs the funk. Isolation is one of the devil's greatest strategies to keep us from experiencing the fullness of God's presence and God's promises in this lifetime. And in this little story of Elijah, we see two different forms of isolation that, when put together, create a toxic cocktail that can keep us spiraling into our depression, into our sorrow, into our funk, far beyond a single season. The first isolation that Elijah shows us simply by running is the isolation of the body, bodily isolation, getting away from people, which says, I want to be alone. He caught wind that Queen Jezebel wants to kill him, so he simply runs out to the wilderness. He removed himself from everyone. It was a simple knee-jerk reaction of self-preservation, and I, for one, can't blame him. If you can remember back, for me at least, it's about age 12, where girls started to shed their cooties. I think it was close to summer, I got a phone call from one of my classmates named Rachel. Don't remember the whole thing, but I know it had to be short because I don't know what to talk to girls. But I remember the essence of it was this. I kind of like you, Bo. Will you go with me? Do you guys know what go with me means? Is that just an 80s term? It means, so you can't drive, I can't drive. We can't go anywhere. Will you go with me out on the playground? Can we be a thing around lunchtime? I'll never come to your house, you never come to my house, but do you want to go together? I didn't know what to do. No thank you. Something like that came out. I know I said no. It was another 10 years till anybody asked me again, but no, it wasn't that long. 7 maybe. And that was it. That was the phone call. And shortly after, my dad walks by and he said, what was that phone call about? I said, it was Rachel. He said, what'd she want? I said she wanted to go with me. And in his kindest, most sympathetic voice, my dad looks at me. She wanted to go with you. Did you? Girl likes you. Girl likes you. It was in that moment, I kid you not, I decided I'm running away. I didn't pack food, didn't pack clothes, didn't have time. I walked to the garage, jumped on my bike, and started riding. I rode till I got to a little hillside right across from a pond, and I pulled my bike over and sat there, away from people, and I'm not gonna lie, I felt safe. I felt calm. I felt not threatened. I felt free of hormones for a bit. They tend to follow you. But it was safe. I didn't have to worry about my dad saying anything to me anymore. Kind of like Elijah was safe from the queen. When we face addictions, we tend to isolate ourselves because maybe you felt this way. When you know you're wrong, you feel like everybody's looking at you with judgmental daggers in their eyes and reminding you what an evil person you are. So it's easier just to not see them. or when you broke a vow, broke a promise to your spouse or to your kids, it's easier to not be around them because you're reminded and feel guilty every time you see them of how much you hurt them. Or if it happened to you, it's easier just to be away and leave your spouse so that you never have to see them, be reminded of what the awful things they did to you and your kids. Or when you're hurting because your spouse or a family member died, it's easier just not to talk about it because every time you talk about it, someone's going to say something stupid and make you feel worse about being alone. It's easier, just safer, less painful to be away from people, right? I felt safe on the hillside. 10 minutes later, I made the quarter-mile ride back to my house. Didn't get very far. For that moment, I felt safe. But the problem with this simple isolation of the body is it doesn't actually deal with the funk. It doesn't deal with the thing that drives us down into the funk or has the way of driving us even deeper into the funk. It simply sedates you a bit. It's kind of a drug for a bit. It numbs you to the pain that took you there in the first place by getting away from the things that caused it. But it doesn't ultimately free you from it, does it? And that's the second part, the second form of isolation that once, I wrestled all week with people in the office. I was like, does the one cause the other? Do each of them cause the other one? No, I'm convinced now that the first form of isolation is the bodily one. You get away from people. That allows the second one to actually make sense and work. And that's isolation of belief, which says, not that I want to be alone, I am alone. And these two forms of isolation mixed together can lock anyone into a funk for months or years. That's what Elijah was faced with. I had it up there in yellow when I had the passage of scripture. It says, I am the only one left. There was a twofold part of that statement. He said, I'm the only one who's been faithful. All the other Israelites have turned their back on you. I'm the only one left. And I am the only prophet left. There's no one else here. When you isolate yourself, you develop the belief that there is no one out there like me. When you isolate yourself, you begin to believe that no one out there can or does understand me. When you isolate yourself in body, away from people, long enough, you start to believe things like this in this church. I am the only Christian who has a pornography addiction. I am the only Christian who struggles with doubting God. I'm the only Christian who struggles believing that maybe evolution did take place rather than a 6 or 7 day creation. I'm the only Christian who cheated on my spouse. I'm the only Christian who knows what it's like to be cheated on by my spouse for years. I'm the only Christian in this room who knows what it feels like to have lost a child. I'm the only Christian in this room who knows what it feels like to be alone. I'm the only Christian in this room who feels like I've failed as a parent. I'm the only Christian in this room who was raped or sexually abused. I'm the only Christian in this room who's struggling right now to believe that God even exists. And when you begin to isolate yourself from people and these false realities start slipping in, because let me tell you something. Everyone I stated here, I promise you, there's more than one person sitting here today who's struggling with that. But you isolate yourself from people long enough, who's going to pull you out? Who is even close enough to you to speak truth? And who is close enough to you that you trust enough that when they speak this truth to you, you're going to believe it? I know it's horrible. Makes me sad too. I feel like we're connected. Can you see how these two forms of isolation, when put together, can keep you in a horrible funk for a horribly long time? Elijah was set up to be in this place well beyond the days that he was. Because there is the way out, and God provided his out, and fortunately, Elijah grabbed onto that out right away. So that's the hope. This funk you've been in for days, months, years. Though it has felt like a new reality, so much so that you feel like you can't even climb out, or you stopped trying to climb out years ago, the opportunity is sitting right here in front of you, right here in this passage. When God speaks to him, 1 Kings 19:15, then God said, go. And watch what he makes him do. Listen, get out of your isolation. Get out of your isolation of body, and you're going to find you are not the only one. Remember the two things he claimed when he yelled at God? He said, I am the only one left. I am the only faithful one. A few verses later, God says, hey, by the way, there's 7,000 more Israelites that I have preserved who have never bowed a knee nor kissed the mouth of some other god. You're not alone. In fact, what he finds out is that Obadiah, who is serving the king as kind of a closet believer in the true God, has been helping to secretly get believers to escape, hiding in caves so they would not be killed for faithfully following the God of Israel. And later in this chapter, he walks out and meets this guy named Elisha, who out in the field, after meeting Elijah, tells his parents he's gone, he's leaving, drops his farm equipment, and follows Elijah. And several chapters later in the next book, in 2 Kings 2, when Elijah leaves this world and leaves Elisha, people look at Elisha and say, the spirit of Elijah is upon Elisha. In other words, he wasn't the last prophet. He wasn't the only one. There were others. He was rising up through Elijah. He wasn't alone. Your call this morning is to go. Get out of your isolation. Listen, this worship folder every week, and we talk about this in staff all the time, presenting opportunities for people to connect, because here's what happens. When we turn into a disconnected people, we are called to be disciples that produce fruit, producing love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. But when we are disconnected, when we isolate ourselves bodily and isolate ourselves by belief, we stop producing fruit and we start producing a funk. And it stinks. Every week we show you when life groups meet. Mom's Connection, SoulCon starting up again. Journey into Hope, this new parents group that's going to meet on Sunday. And listen, some of you have friends here. Why not start connecting regularly about the things that matter and start growing together? strengthening your faith together so that when you get close to a funk, there's not these false beliefs that push you away or pull you down deeper. We'll keep offering opportunities. But you got to take the risk. To work through that false belief that you are alone. And ultimately find people who are in or have walked that journey before you. Might be able to throw that rope down to you and help pull you out. In other words, we've got to work to de-isolate ourselves. And when we de-isolate ourselves, we begin to see things as, not as we see them, but as they really are. Yesterday, remember that rotten day yesterday, that awful junky weather we had? We were down and spent the night down in Columbus because we had at a hotel, and I had to get my kids to a show choir contest. And I walked out there at 7 o'clock. My whole vehicle's iced over. So I didn't have a scraper, so okay, I'll just start it, defrost it, get things melting, and eventually we'll get on the road. So about 5 minutes later, I walked out there, put the windshield wipers on, little hole about this big. But I had to start going. I shared this, my wife knows already. She found out first service. So I at least want to get it up to the entryway of the hotel so I could pick up the kids, keeping the defrosting going in the front and the back. So I pulled up, but I was driving a little bit like this, because it was right in the middle. And every now and then, just to make sure I open up the door and look out, make sure I was hitting nothing on this side either. I went really slow. Didn't hit anything that I'm aware of, and I didn't hit anything at all. Got there. Listen, when your vehicle is iced over, good luck. You're not seeing nothing. But even just that little glimpse of de-icing, of de-isolating, you start to get a glimpse of where things really are and your reality of your situation. I want to tell you this story that happened here 1 hour ago. I shared about one of my most prolonged funks about going through my son's accident and losing all kinds of dreams. Finished preaching here. When you're in those dreams, you wonder, God, what in the world are you going to do with this? What's the point? Is this just to make me miserable? Is it just to make life hard? I'm the only one, besides my wife, who this was for. And now I got to figure out how to deal with a son with one leg. Start walking up this way to go out and start talking to people. And this lady I've never seen before, she says, "Excuse me, Pastor Bo, I got something crazy for you." Now, a lot of times when I talk to you, you got crazy stuff. So when someone starts by saying, "I got something crazy for you," I kind of want to run. Pastor Bo, we've never met. And I told her I was going to share this. It's not. My name is Margot. She said, "Your son's accident. Did it happen in August?" Yeah, August 17th. Were you at the Holmes County Fair that week? Yeah, in fact, we were at the Holmes County Fair the day of his accident. We went there, and then we came out here, and that's later that day when the accident happened. You went through the sheep barn, didn't you? Yes, we went through the sheep barn. In fact, the last picture we have of my son with 2 legs is walking through one of the barns. My family's from Holmes County, and my parents divorced when I was young. My 2 other siblings stayed there, and I lived in Pennsylvania. But every summer I came back and I did 4-H, and I had sheep. And your dad bought my sheep at the auction that week. I remember your family coming through there. I remember your big black stroller. It was a double stroller with our 1-year-old and 2-year-old daughters at the time. A few days later, after your dad, the accident happened and your dad bought the lamb, he told my dad, and my dad told me about what happened to your son. And she said, Bo, for the last 13 years, I've been praying for Bryson. I said, what do you do? He's like, why are you marrying? I'm the 4-H educator, extension educator here. I do this job because of Bryson. He's the reason. It so changed me during that time. He's the reason I do my job. I've been praying for him for 13 years, every day. Started doing Dayspring Community Sports. My kids were playing football, and there's this boy out there one Saturday morning this year that was reffing with just one leg, Bryson. My kid asked me, Mom, what's the leg? She just told a story about why kids lose legs, not knowing that's Bryson. And then this morning I share my story and how my son's up here leading worship. It's the first time she connected in 13 years. From a sheep barn to a church. Holmes County to Pennsylvania to Marion. If I stay isolated and never talk to people, I will never find out why this story matters and what God can do through a kid who now he's 17. He's interesting. But it's a story of an even bigger God. Those are the stories you find that you get to see of God working when you stop isolating yourself from people. You see a God of miracles. You see a God of awesome wonder. You see a God who never quit, who never gave up, who's always been pursuing you. You'll find out, doggone it, you are still lovable, even though you've done some stupid, unlovable things. And your story someday will help bring someone else out of their funk and put them on a pathway of breathing life into their family and into their world, just like Margot prayed for 13 years. And it all came together here because for some reason she had to come to Dayspring with her family. I don't believe in dumb luck. I believe in a wondrous God. You de-ice yourself, you de-isolate yourself, just a crack on the front of your windshield. You will start to see the reality of what really is and not what you've come to believe there to be. You are God's. You are lovable. You're worth pursuing. You're worth adopting into family once again. You're worth being in relationship with. You're worth the healing He wants to extend to you. And you're not as bad of a parent, a wife, a husband, a father, a grandparent, child, as you thought yourself to be.